Hello, everyone. I'm Alex,
I'm Andy.
and we're Art Snobs. And today, on this second episode of Art Snobs, we are going to be discussing realism in gaming because, as a retro gamer, at least I know this is something I definitely think about a lot. And I think it is interesting to look at realism in gaming kind of through the lens of realism as an artistic movement and kind of its implications that it had at the time when it was big and how we view realism as gamers. To start this off, I'll just ask you, what do you think about realism in gaming? Do you prefer games that look more realistic?
No, I do not.
Okay, that's the end of the video.
End of video. I am not a fan of realism, the art movement, nor realism in video games.
You don't like Edward Hopper?
I don't. I like Edward Hopper.
Yeah, that's realism. That's realism in my mind.
I guess I'm thinking hyper realism, like
Yeah.
photo realism.
Yeah, no, that freaks me out a bit, which I think honestly in some ways maybe is a better like parallel to gaming realism.
That was kind of where my mind went, I think, when I was thinking about it. I think that, well, it's interesting because I think for a certain type of gaming genre, the goal to the goal to like hit this kind of hyper realism has always been there, which is funny because when I think about like the era that I grew up playing games, it was even there then, but they were like so not even close. Like at least now they're close, I feel, but
did you feel like they were close at the time?
it's weird because I was also a child.
Yeah.
So like, I definitely, I mean, it was definitely the era of you would flip over the back of the Sega Genesis box and look at all the different games, and it would just be like one screenshot of each game, and the sports games especially, you'd be like, oh man, it looks so real, it looks so good. But it didn't. It looked not real at all.
No, that's fair.
So I don't know. I think it's interesting though. Like I'm surprised they've. I feel like we're still pretty far away though. Like when you look at these like hyper real games, like AAA stuff. I don't know. I get there's still like they hit. There's a lot of hits and a lot of misses. Like I still feel like they haven't really nailed like human movement.
Yeah, it's definitely less like the fidelity of the models and more how they move. That's kind of honestly, like, I don't want to play the Final Fantasy VII remakes because the art style freaks me out so much. It's like, if they are, like, anime-ish looking characters, you don't need to make every single pore on their skin. Like, that kind of freaks me. It's like Uncanny Valley, big time.
Yeah, it's very weird. I think it's weird because it's completely unnecessary. Like, everyone would have played a Final Fantasy VII remake game, kind of no matter what it looked like, I think.
Yeah.
But it didn't have to be hyper real like that.
No, definitely.
Sure.
And they could have gone like not literally a Persona 5 route, but like that kind of just, just because you're not making a game super realistic doesn't mean you aren't putting a ton of time into the visuals. It just means you're doing something else with it. You know?
Right. And it was funny when you were talking about realism in video games, Persona 4 was actually one that popped in my head because the life sim, aspect of that. But I feel like the village in Japan that you're in that game, I don't know, to me really nailed kind of like real life. So even though I've never lived in a village in Japan, it just felt authentic.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because when I said realism, I was thinking purely about visuals. But since video games are narrative based, also, you can also have realism with like the story and the setting and things. And you saying that and talking about Persona 4 and talking about a realistic Japanese village made me think of Shenmue.
Yeah.
Because I think that's another huge example of like, I played Shenmue for a while, like probably 2 or 3 hours, which means I didn't get very far in the game, but I was, spending some amount of time with it. And, it's one of those ones where I had to admit to myself, it's going to be pretty hard for me to like return to this and play it in a modern day. But just as like a world to interact with, it's super cool. Like that, there's just such a vibe to that village, and like every house is like lived in, and there's people have stories, and like there's just like random gossip with people on the street. It's like super cool how they did that.
And they definitely, when that game came out, that was definitely something they hyped quite a bit, was that realism of it, in that this was a world where every piece of it was carefully crafted in some way. And then the clock, like the internal clock and like the date, time, and weather, all of that, like some of that seems silly now because I feel like they have kind of perfected time, the passage of time in video games now in a very realistic way, and weather too. But at the time, that game, and rightfully so, was like very avant-garde, I think.
Yeah, no, it's sick to return to. And then I feel like going back to your point though about like games striving for realism in that kind of more straightforward sense, and you kind of mentioned this too. I think racing and like sports games have always been kind of the forefront of that. Like there's pretty much every generation and every like leap in technology has some racing game that is meant to show it off.
Yeah, the Forza games, I think I've never been a huge racing fan, but my jaw dropped when I saw those in like the previous gen.
Yeah, they look really good.
And now it's just like, it blows my mind. Yeah, what was the other one you mentioned besides racing?
Just like sports in general,
games,
like football, basketball, whatever.
Yeah. Again, I mean, I think sports is one where I think we could benefit from another like NBA Jam or something just completely off the wall. But yeah, the realism thing is definitely there. I think this, like the FIFA games too. I think that's for me, those seem a little more interesting than Madden. But
because you're European.
Because I'm European.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think definitely though, like the NBA Jam point also exists in racing games. Like, Mario Kart 8 was huge, and that's not as realistic as Forza, obviously. But then also, Forza's realism is pretty shallow because it's not like the cars take realistic damage, or it's like, it's a simcade. Like it's not like an 100%. It's more realistic than like Need for Speed or like F-Zero. But you're still playing a pretty arcadey racing games compared to real racing. And it's interesting that, not that that's overlooked, because I've played Forza long enough to know people have very strong opinions about whether they want it to be more simulation or more arcade. But like Forza gets away with being called realistic, while, if you're playing it, it isn't. It's not realistic.
I do feel like back in the day, the Gran Turismo games were very much like hailed for being like uber realistic but I don't think I haven't revisited those games in a long time, but I feel like the tech just wasn't there. But at the time, we were all very in awe.
Yeah.
More so of how the cars controlled, and like the idea that this is how that exact car would be in this exact situation. But it was kind of boring.
Fair. I have not really gotten into Gran Turismo yet.
But I think real life is boring, and that's like, why do they want to do that in video games?
Yeah, right? Yeah. And I think, the other part of that is also like, I don't know, like the epitome of everything I don't like about realism is kind of all boiled down into Gen 7 as an entity. Like there's just so much gray and brown war games where it's like, and also it's like that dichotomy between like the more realistic a game gets, the more like kind of gritty or like not fun it gets. And I don't mean that even from a gameplay sense, just more of like we're not having fun here, like this is a serious thing. Everybody's sad and it's raining.
Yeah. I think the Last of Us games have that kind of dull gray brown thing, but there's so much like life in the characters and in the story that it kind of transcends that. But at the same time, I don't really think those are beautiful games, like visually. Yeah.
No, it always is like an arbitrary task. Like you never are going to get like a game looking perfectly realistic, and then also the games that strive for that age the worst.
Totally.
It's like
Yeah, that's like the whole Wind Waker thing. Like in the day, everyone was up in arms because we didn't have the realistic looking Zelda.
The gritty Zelda.
But now, like Wind Waker, everyone's obsessed with it. But it took like a decade.
Yeah, and Twilight Princess looks like a Wii game.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I feel like hair is still a struggle. They haven't quite figured out hair yet. Or maybe they don't care. But like Elden Ring, I was making my character in Elden Ring, and that is a beautiful game, but the hair on the characters is not beautiful.
It doesn't look right.
No, it doesn't move right. It just isn't But water is like always a thing game developers have been obsessed with. I feel like that's like the one like element that if we can nail like
Water,
the water, then it which
The whole engine's good.
right, exactly. So
Yeah, wave race.
I've always gotten the impression that the sorry anyone that works in the industry, I'm sure you're very talented and work very hard, but I feel like the movie industry kind of got the top tier like CGI talent. It's kind of what I've always thought in my head. Like the people rendering stuff in the game industry are like one tier down from the movie people, but I have no idea. That's not based on any facts whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, there is also that thing, though, about, like, CGI in movies doesn't even... It's, like, gone worse or something. I don't know. There's always, like, that guy with all the tentacles from Pirates of the Caribbean that's in every single example of that.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what a good... I mean, but I do feel like in movies it has gotten to a point where you can't even tell anymore. And like when it's done really, really well. But like the fantasy sci-fi stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm not here to talk about movies. I don't know about movies.
Yeah, we hate movies.
Movies are not realistic enough.
But I mean, I don't know. Speaking to like some attempts at realism, I do like. I think the old, and I mean old as in like 6th gen Need for Speed games did something really cool where it's like in Carbon, definitely in Carbon, I think maybe in Most Wanted, you have like, it's like full motion video cutscenes, but since it's a few generations later, it was like full motion video that they kind of mocapped over or whatever, so it was CGI again, but it also was real actors. And it's like, I don't know, it's a little weird and like kind of everything's super shimmery and shiny, but it's so like camp. I don't know, I love those cutscenes. Everyone's taking street racing very seriously and they're all very grumpy. I don't know, that is an example of realism in games that I enjoy.
Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball.
Yeah, you need the ultimate realism for that game.
You need the ultimate realism.
You got to get the physics down. Perfect.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's always been like hand in hand with every generation of video game technology. You know, when it comes out, like that's kind of like how we judge it by how good the graphics are, but totally unnecessary. Like my favorite games, I don't even know like how far back I'd have to go to think of a game that I really enjoyed that like tried to be, you know, a graphic like novel, you know, powerhouse or whatever. I don't know. Celeste.
Is that your example?
That's my example of realism. Like? I have no examples.
I mean, mine was from like 2005, so something there.
I mean, I think there's just more to be said about. I don't know. I'm thinking about Edward Hopper now, also, and I think mood is important. I think when you look at the early realism in art in those movements, I think mood was a very important aspect of it. And when I think about games that I think to me pull off the realism in a way that I think works, it's more about the mood, like your Persona 4s, Celeste even, you know, like there's nothing realistic about that game. It's about, you know, depression.
Yeah, that's true. That's realistic.
Those are real things.
The 2D pixel graphics are not.
No. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I think also there's always a trade-off between realism and player agency that you have to take. Like, you know, the Uncharted games, for example, are pretty much just like, do this exact thing, and then do this exact thing, and then it's just that for a whole video game. Yeah. And then also, like, you know, that great new innovation of you squeeze through a tiny hallway instead of having a loading screen. It's like now every single room in all of these worlds have to, for some reason, be connected by a tiny little hallway instead of just having a loading screen.
Right.
Because that's the most exciting gameplay ever.
Yeah, I don't know. The Yakuza games, I think, are worth mentioning here. I do think that dev team, you know, when I think of like human movement and, you know, superb voice acting and things like that, I do think that team is really doing a really good job in that realm. Yeah,
and I think that's an interesting one to point out, because in contrast to like your Last of Us or your Uncharted's. Yakuza is kind of more of a parody of real life. Like it takes itself a lot less seriously. So I think there is kind of something a little more interesting that they can do with that realism because they are like making fun of us pretty much. Another at least portion of a game that comes to mind is one I never thought I'd mention maybe again in my life, which is Saints Row 4. But there's like a scene or like a portion of that game where you're transported back to like Leave It to Beaver's neighborhood, basically in like the 1950s. And like, Saints Row isn't the most realistic game, obviously, but it's more realistic than like Mario.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, you're walking like super jolly and it's all like very over the top and kind of a parody. I think that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously not a Rockstar game, but the GTA games, but also Red Dead Redemption. I mean, none of us know what it was like to really be a cowboy.
Speak for yourself.
But those games seem to be uber realistic, and in a good way. I think the Red Dead games I'm more drawn to than the GTA games, but I'm sure GTA 5 is probably the most realistic car theft game.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I definitely got a lot of hours out of GTA 5, but I think that was more coercion than anything. Right. Red Dead seems cool. I think we've both said we want to play Red Dead. Yeah. Neither of us have.
I played a little bit, but not. I haven't gotten deep into it, but enough to get the realistic vibes from it.
Yeah, and I think that is also one where you really can kind of set a mood with it, since it is in the Wild West, which is such a kind of fabled time, even though it also was a real time. And just the things I've heard about those games, like how much detail they've put into like the animal behaviors, even it's like it kind of conveys like they really were trying to display a place through realism rather than just making a realistic game and kind of filling it in from there.
Totally. The Sims. Real life.
Yeah,
literally real life.
In some ways, but also it can take you like 2 hours to open a door or walk upstairs in The Sims.
That's true, but if you're bad at cooking, you just got to read cookbooks and then you get better cooking.
Yeah, no, there is. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about gameplay realism at all, which is definitely interesting. But I don't know. I feel like, I guess my main thesis for this discussion was just, I think, not that realism can't exist in games, but just we should be employing it as an artistic tool or an artistic statement rather than just like a tech demo, basically. Like I think video games as a medium and as an art form have become very tied to technological advancement, which in some ways is good because that means people are always working on making them run better and all that stuff. But also it does kind of take away from the artistic nature of it when it is just about showing off a new piece of hardware.
Yeah. Sims VR. If that exists, I would play it, and that would blow my mind.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd like that.
Have you played any VR games? I have not.
I got tricked into playing one demo of one, but besides that, no. I don't know. I don't really want to play VR.
I feel like Resident Evil in VR would be the most terrifying thing in the world.
I could imagine that.
So I don't know. Be careful what you wish for in terms of realism, I suppose. But
I'd maybe play Skyrim and Minecraft in VR.
I was waiting for Skyrim to get some sort of
we haven't
in this game.
We haven't mentioned it yet. But I mean, that's more like I'm just gaining a new perspective on Skyrim and Minecraft. It's like that; those aren't new experiences to me.
This is obviously me attacking in Skyrim.
That's you attacking in Minecraft. Actually, I guess it's
the
both.
same. It's the same.
I have a style of combat I like. One rigid arm movement over and over again.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I have anything more to say about realism.
That's fair. Let me think if I have any other points. Probably not. Look up Edward Hopper if you don't know him. He's pretty cool. He made good paintings of like New York and stuff in the 1920s. Sick. cool. I don't know if he did something bad. If he did, then I hate him, and you shouldn't look him up.
Yeah,
but,
he's been canceled.
I don't know.
And we can't mention him in this video.
But from a purely artistic standpoint, he is cool. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video and every other video we ever make. Join our Patreon. We have plans starting at $1 a month. It helps us make more videos. It helps us make better videos. It helps us keep the store open in real life and have cool in-person events. We have a lot of really awesome ideas for the channel. A lot of like videos bigger than anything we've published so far. We're very excited for it. Hope you guys stick around. Thank you.
Thanks.